It was supposed to be a weekend of celebration. Daniel Hargrave, a successful entrepreneur in his mid-40s, had planned an extravagant anniversary weekend for his wife, Lila. They had been married for 20 years, a picture-perfect couple living in an upscale suburb in New York. Their wealth, carefully curated social circle and pristine family image made them the envy of many. Lila, a former model-turned-philanthropist, had been looking forward to the evening for weeks. Daniel had made reservations at La Belle Vue, an exclusive restaurant with a view of the city. She had selected a dress that shimmered under soft lights, prepared to rekindle the spark in their long marriage. Their daughter, Madison, was home from college for the weekend. At 22, she was poised, intelligent in the pride of her parents. She had brought along her best friend Lexi, a vibrant, beautiful young woman with a carefree attitude. The two girls had been inseparable since high school. What Lila didn't know was that Daniel had his own plans for the weekend. Plans that didn't include her. He had been seeing Lexi behind everyone's back, a secret affair that had escalated during Madison's time at college. What began as an innocent friendship had morphed into something dangerous and intoxicating. On the night of the anniversary, as Lila eagerly waited at the restaurant, Daniel and Lexi were driving out of the city toward a luxury cabin he had rented, far away from prying eyes. Lexi had always been the life of the party, bold, adventurous, and willing to cross lines most wouldn't dare. When Daniel first met her through Madison, she had seemed like another of his daughter's friends, fun and harmless. But over time, their casual conversations became more intimate. Lexi had a way of making Daniel feel younger, more alive. She flirted with him shamelessly, and he, hungry for excitement, reciprocated. Lexi knew exactly what she was doing. She enjoyed the thrill of seduction, especially when it involved power dynamics. Having an affair with her best friend's father was taboo, but that was part of the allure. It was dangerous, exciting, and Lexi reveled in the control she had over Daniel. In contrast, Daniel felt a mix of guilt and exhilaration. He knew what he was doing was wrong, especially with someone so close to his family, but the secrecy added to the adrenaline. He hadn't felt this alive in years. The affair was a ticking time bomb, but Daniel was too far gone to care. As the two speed down the highway toward the cabin, Lexi glanced over at Daniel, her lips curling into a smirk. "You think she knows?" she asked teasingly. Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "No, Lila has no idea." But as he said the words, an uncomfortable pit formed in his stomach. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, one that could destroy his entire family if uncovered. Back at La Belle Vue, Lila checked her phone for the 5th time in half an hour. The waiter had already refilled her champagne glass twice, and the ice in the bucket was melting. Daniel was late, very late. She had tried calling him multiple times, but each call went to voicemail. Lila brushed off the growing unease in her chest, telling herself there must have been a delay at work. Daniel was a busy man, after all. As the minutes ticked by, the restaurant began to fill with couples. Lila watched them with envy, feeling an odd sense of isolation. She could see the waiters glancing in her direction, exchanging sympathetic looks. She hated the pity in their eyes. The clock struck 9 p.m. and still no sign of Daniel. Frustrated and humiliated, Lila paid for the champagne and left the restaurant. As she stepped into the cool evening air, she called Daniel's phone again, this time leaving a message. "Daniel, I'm worried. Where are you? Call me back, please." But as the night wore on, Lila's concern grew. Something wasn't right. Daniel and Lexi arrived at the secluded cabin, the excitement between them palpable. The moonlit forest surrounded them, and the night seemed like a perfect escape from the pressures of their lives. Lexi's carefree laughter filled the cabin as she popped open a bottle of expensive wine. The inside of the cabin was luxurious, plush furniture, a fireplace, and a panoramic view of the surrounding woods. Daniel had gone all out to make this weekend with Lexi special. It was a world away from the carefully curated life he had with Lila and Madison. As they drank and laughed, Daniel felt himself letting go of his responsibilities. He could pretend for just one night that this was the life he wanted, uninhibited, free from the weight of his marriage and fatherhood. But beneath the surface, guilt gnawed at him. He knew he was betraying the two people who mattered most to him, but the pull of Lexi was too strong. She represented everything he felt he had lost. youth, excitement, and the thrill of the forbidden. As the night wore on, Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it, knowing it was Lila. He wasn't ready to face the consequences of his actions yet. The next morning, Lila woke up to an empty bed and an unanswered phone. Daniel still hadn't returned any of her calls. Panic began to creep in, and she started calling his colleagues and friends, but no one knew where he was at home. Madison sensed something was off. Her mother's unease was palpable, and it didn't take long for her to overhear snippets of conversation. Her mother's worried voice asking around about Daniel's whereabouts. Madison had noticed her father acting strangely over the past few months. He had been distant, distracted, and there were nights when he hadn't come home until late. She had suspected something, but never imagined it could be as serious as infidelity. Later that afternoon, as Lila paced the living room in frustration, Madison decided to check her father's office. She knew he had a separate work phone, one that he never left lying around. It was there, locked in his desk drawer. After searching for a while, Madison found the key. The phone revealed everything. Hundreds of messages between her father and Lexi, each more damning than the last. Madison's heart pounded in her chest as she scrolled through them, her best friend and father's affair laid out in shocking detail. Her hands trembled as she dropped the phone, disbelief and rage flooding through her. Lexi, her closest friend, had been sleeping with her father. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have ever imagined. Madison was paralyzed by the revelation. The text between her father and Lexi detailed an affair that had been going on for months. She could barely process the betrayal. Her father, the man she had always admired, and her best friend, the two people she trusted most in the world, had deceived her in the worst possible way. She felt sick to her stomach, the room spinning as rage built up inside her. How could they do this? How could her father destroy their family? And how could Lexi betray her like this? Madison's mind raced, thoughts of revenge swirling in her head. She couldn't tell her mother. Not yet. The pain would be unbearable for Lila. But Madison wasn't going to let this go. She was going to make them pay. Madison confronted Lexi that same evening. She couldn't wait. She texted Lexi, asking her to come over, pretending nothing was wrong. When Lexi arrived, Madison could barely keep her emotions in check. In her room, away from her mother, Madison exploded. How could you? With my father? Lexi froze, her eyes wide. She stammered, trying to deny it. But Madison threw her father's phone on the bed, the damning text still open. Lexi's face paled as she realized the gravity of the situation. Madison, I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened. Madison's fury boiled over. You were my best friend. You've ruined everything. Lexi tried to apologize, but Madison wasn't listening. She felt numb, her heart filled with rage and betrayal. After Lexi left, Madison knew what she had to do. She had to destroy them both. She couldn't let them get away with this. But her plan wasn't just about confrontation. It was going to be much worse as she plotted her revenge. She felt a sense of control she hadn't felt since discovering the affair. Little did they know Madison's revenge would come swiftly and violently. Madison's heart raced as she sat on her bed, the weight of her discovery pressing heavily on her chest. The air in her room felt thick, suffocating even as the magnitude of her father's betrayal sank in deeper with each passing second. The room that had once felt like her sanctuary was now a prison, filled with memories of Lexi's laughter, sleepovers, and secrets they shared. Secrets that now seemed insignificant compared to the dark truth she had uncovered. Her eyes, red from the mix of shock and rage, kept darting toward her father's phone. The incriminating messages burned into her mind. Lexi's flirtatious words, her father's eager responses. It was as though she could hear their voices mocking her. Every smile Lexi had given her, every kind gesture, now felt like a calculated act of deceit. The girl, who had been like a sister to her, had been sleeping with her father, tearing apart the very fabric of their lives. Madison clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. She couldn't just let this go. The betrayal wasn't something she could move past with a simple confrontation or an angry conversation. This was personal, and the wound was too deep. They both needed to pay, and it had to be devastating. Madison stared out the window, watching the sun begin to dip below the horizon. Her thoughts darkened with the evening sky, her anger transforming into something far more dangerous. She knew that confronting Lexi was only the beginning. The real reckoning was yet to come. The next morning, Madison woke up with a grim determination. Gone was the hesitation and uncertainty. She knew exactly what she had to do. She wasn't just going to destroy her father and Lexi. She was going to make them suffer in the way she was suffering. But it had to be precise, and it had to be perfect. Madison began to plan, meticulously mapping out each detail in her mind. She didn't rush. Instead, she spent the day gathering her thoughts, considering every possible angle. She knew she couldn't act on impulse, not if she wanted this to end in the way she envisioned. Revenge, she decided, was an art form, and she was going to craft her masterpiece with patience and precision. Her father was scheduled to return home the next evening. Her mother had no idea what was happening, and Madison intended to keep it that way for now. The knowledge that her mother was blissfully unaware made Madison's resolve even stronger. Lila had been waiting for Daniel at the restaurant. Thinking he was late due to work while he was off in some remote cabin with Lexi, the thought made Madison sick to her stomach. She spent hours in her room that night, researching, making notes, and crafting her plan with chilling calmness. Every scenario played out in her head like a twisted game of chess, each move leading closer to an inevitable conclusion. She wasn't going to just expose them. That would be too easy. No, Madison needed them to feel her pain. To experience the same gut-wrenching betrayal she had felt when she uncovered their affair, Daniel arrived home late the following evening, pulling his expensive car into the driveway with an air of casual confidence. He had told Lila that work had kept him tied up all weekend and that he regretted missing their anniversary dinner. He knew she would be upset, but he had spent years cultivating a perfect image as the devoted husband and loving father. Lila would forgive him. She always did. As he entered the house, he was greeted by Lila's cold silence. She sat in the living room, her back turned to him, the dim light casting shadows across the room. She didn't say anything as he walked in. Her disappointment was evident in her posture, but she wasn't yet aware of the true nature of his deceit. "Lila, I'm sorry," Daniel began, removing his coat. "Work's been insane. You know how it is. I'll make it up to you, I promise." Lila turned slowly, her eyes locking with his. "Work," she repeated, her voice low. There was something different in the way she said it, something that made Daniel pause. But before he could ask her what she meant, Madison appeared at the top of the staircase. "Dad," she called down, her voice steady, emotionless. Daniel looked up, his heart skipping a beat. Madison's expression was unreadable, her face pale, her eyes fixed on him with a strange intensity. "What is it, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice faltering slightly. "We need to talk." Madison led Daniel into her room, closing the door behind them with a deliberate click. Her calm demeanor unnerved Daniel. He was used to his daughter being expressive, emotional. This detached version of her felt alien. He sat on the edge of her bed, fidgeting with his watch, unsure of what to expect. Madison paced for a moment, as though collecting her thoughts. Finally, she stopped in front of him. Her arms crossed over her chest. "I know, Dad," she said flatly. Daniel blinked, confused. "No, what about Lexi? I know everything." Her voice was devoid of emotion, the words cutting through the air like a blade. Daniel's face drained of color. He stood up abruptly, his heart pounding in his chest. "Madison, it's not what you think." "Stop," she interrupted, her tone sharp. "Don't insult me by trying to lie. I found the messages. I saw everything." There was a long, suffocating silence as Daniel struggled to find the words, but there were no excuses left to offer. His mind raced, searching for a way to fix this, but Madison's expression told him there was no fixing it. The betrayal was too deep. "I made a mistake," Daniel finally whispered. "I never meant for it to happen." Madison's laugh was bitter, cold. "A mistake? It's been going on for months. She's my best friend, Dad. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Daniel hung his head, guilt consuming him. "I'm so sorry, Madison." I don't know what else to say. You don't need to say anything, she replied, her voice eerily calm. Because this isn't over. Over the next few days, Madison avoided both her parents as much as possible. She hadn't yet told her mother about the affair, choosing instead to let Daniel stew in his guilt and fear. Every time he tried to talk to her, she brushed him off with cold indifference, but behind her calm exterior, Madison's mind was a whirlwind of anger and calculated planning. She began reaching out to Lexi, pretending to forgive her in a series of carefully crafted texts. She knew Lexi would be expecting an explosive confrontation, but instead Madison played the role of the broken-hearted friend, pretending to be willing to move past it for the sake of their friendship. Lexi, sensing a chance at redemption, fell for it. But Madison wasn't looking for forgiveness. She was looking for retribution. The tension in the Hargrave household was palpable. Lila noticed the strained interactions between her husband and daughter, but didn't press them for answers. Daniel, consumed by guilt, became increasingly paranoid, constantly fearing that Madison would reveal the affair to Lila. His anxiety grew with each passing day, and he began drinking heavily to cope with the stress. Meanwhile, Madison was biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to enact her revenge. The anticipation gnawed at her, but she remained patient. She wanted to make sure the fallout would be complete, that both her father and Lexi would suffer the full consequences of their actions. Madison knew that revenge was best served cold. She continued to string Lexi along, convincing her that they could still be friends, that maybe one day she could forgive both her and her father. The deception was cruel, but Madison felt no remorse. They had crossed a line that could never be undone. Now it was her turn to control the narrative. Lexi, ever the opportunist, believed Madison's act. She started meeting up with Madison again, cautiously at first, but soon they were spending time together as if nothing had happened. Madison had mastered her poker face, pretending to laugh at Lexi's jokes, pretending to care about the shallow things that once bonded them. But beneath the surface, Madison's anger simmered, waiting for the perfect moment to boil over. One evening, while Madison and Lexi were having drinks at a rooftop bar, Lexi confided in her, her voice low and secretive. "I'm sorry for everything, you know. It wasn't just about your dad. I was attracted to the power, the thrill. But I miss us. I miss our friendship." Madison's stomach churned, but she forced a smile. "I miss it too," she lied, her eyes betraying none of the rage burning inside her. It was almost too easy playing this game. Lexi, so self-absorbed and blinded by her own arrogance, didn't see the danger lurking in Madison's every word and her calculated actions. Madison's plan had been brewing in her mind for weeks. The time had finally come to put it into action. She knew that both her father and Lexi had to pay the ultimate price, but it had to be done carefully. No one could suspect her, and the situation had to look like a tragic accident. A chaotic mess that spiraled out of control. Revenge was no longer just about personal satisfaction. It was about closure. The Hargrave estate, a sprawling mansion tucked away in a secluded part of town, was the perfect location. Its isolation provided a veil of privacy, and its grandeur gave Madison the cover she needed. She knew the estate better than anyone, knew its hidden corners, its secret passages. It was here that she would execute her final act of vengeance. Madison made sure everything was perfect. She invited Lexi over for a girls' night under the guise of rekindling their friendship. It was all part of the game, and Lexi, still blind to the storm brewing beneath Madison's calm exterior, accepted eagerly. Lexi believed that her charm and manipulative ways had once again allowed her to slither out of a potentially dangerous situation, but she had no idea that Madison was playing a much darker, deadlier game. Madison prepared everything meticulously. She had spent the past few days carefully arranging the estate, setting the stage for what would unfold. A small, intimate dinner was prepared, candles were lit, and a bottle of wine sat chilling in the dining room. Madison ensured that her father was home too, though he had no idea what was about to happen. Daniel had been trying to reconcile with Madison, trying to make amends for his betrayal, but she had given him nothing but cold, calculated indifference. When Lexi arrived, the atmosphere was strangely warm, almost inviting. She walked in wearing a smug smile, looking every bit like the girl who believed she had won. Her eyes flicked toward Daniel, who was lounging in the living room, nursing a glass of whiskey. The tension in the room was thick, But Lexi, ever the seductress, seemed completely at ease. "Madison," she greeted, giving her a playful hug. "I'm so glad we're finally moving past all this. I missed you." Madison smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes. "Me too," she said softly. "I've missed this." They moved to the dining room where the food and wine awaited them. Madison kept the conversation light, leading Lexi into a false sense of security. Her father, on the other hand, was growing more uncomfortable by the second. He hadn't spoken to Lexi directly since Madison had confronted him, and being in the same room as the girl who had nearly torn his family apart felt like torture, but he remained silent, sipping his drink as if the alcohol could somehow numb the guilt eating away at him. As the evening wore on, Madison casually mentioned that she wanted to show Lexi something upstairs, something personal, something only a true friend would understand. Lexi, intrigued, followed Madison up the grand staircase, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. He watched them disappear around the corner, a sense of foreboding settling in his gut, but he was too deep into his own guilt and self-pity to act on it. Madison led Lexi into her bedroom, the very room where she had discovered the affair. The room was dimly lit, with only a few candles casting flickering shadows on the walls. Lexi glanced around, a little uneasy now that the atmosphere had shifted. There was something cold and calculating about Madison's demeanor, something unsettling. "What did you want to show me?" Lexi asked, her voice tinged with nervous laughter. Madison turned to her slowly, her face devoid of emotion. "I wanted to show you what happens to people who betray me." Before Lexi could react, Madison pulled a concealed knife from behind her back, the blade gleaming in the candlelight. Lexi's eyes widened in horror as she realized what was happening, but it was too late. Madison lunged at her, the knife slicing through the air with terrifying precision. Lexi screamed, trying to back away, but Madison was relentless. The first strike hit Lexi in the side, causing her to stumble back, gasping for breath. Blood seeped through her clothing, and she looked at Madison with wide, panicked eyes. "Madison, please," she whimpered, clutching her side. But Madison didn't stop. Her face was a mask of fury as she drove the knife into Lexi again and again, each thrust fueled by the months of anger, betrayal, and humiliation. The once beautiful, confident girl was now reduced to a bloodied, crumpled figure on the floor. Her last breaths came in short, gurgling gasps as she stared up at Madison in disbelief, her life slipping away. Madison stood over her, breathing heavily, the knife still clenched in her hand. The blood was everywhere, on her hands, on the floor, splattered across the walls. Lexi's body lay motionless at her feet, her once smug expression now frozen in a grotesque mask of terror. For a moment, Madison felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Lexi was dead. She had paid the price for her betrayal, but it wasn't over yet. There was still one more person who needed to face the consequences. Madison cleaned herself up quickly, washing away the blood with a disturbing sense of calm. She discarded the knife and stepped out of her room, her heart pounding with anticipation. Her father was next. She moved silently down the hallway, her bare feet barely making a sound on the wooden floors. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she saw Daniel still sitting in the living room, his back to her, staring into his glass of whiskey. He hadn't noticed her approach. Lost in his own thoughts, Madison took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to do. "Dad," she called softly. Daniel looked up, startled. He saw the strange, almost serene look on his daughter's face and frowned. "Madison, is everything okay?" She stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "No, Dad, nothing is okay." Daniel blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Madison's voice was calm, almost detached. "I killed her. I killed Lexi." The words hung in the air, and for a moment Daniel didn't understand. But then his face drained of color, and he stood up abruptly, his eyes wide with shock. "What are you talking about?" "She's dead," Madison repeated, her voice flat. "I killed her. And now it's your turn." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, panic rising like a tidal wave. He stumbled back, his mind racing. "Madison, no, this isn't you. You don't know what you're saying." But Madison's expression remained cold, unfeeling. "I know exactly what I'm saying, Dad. You destroyed our family. You betrayed Mom. You betrayed me, and now you have to pay for it." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a gun she had stolen from Daniel's office earlier that day. The weight of it in her hand felt right, like it was always meant to end this way. Daniel's eyes widened in horror as he realized what was happening. "Madison, please. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I'll fix it, I swear." But Madison didn't hesitate. She raised the gun, her finger hovering over the trigger. Her hands were steady, her aim sure. "It's too late for that," she whispered. The gunshot echoed through the estate, a deafening sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Daniel collapsed to the floor, a look of shock and disbelief frozen on his face. Blood pooled around him, his body motionless, lifeless. Madison stood over him, the gun still in her hand, her heart racing. The satisfaction she had expected to feel didn't come. Instead, there was only a hollow emptiness, a numbness that spread through her entire body. She had done it. She had avenged her family. But at what cost? Madison sat in the center of the Hargrave estate's grand living room, the house eerily quiet, despite the violence that had just unfolded within its walls. The bodies of her father, Daniel, and her former best friend Lexi lay lifeless nearby, the crimson stain of their blood seeping into the lavish carpets. The faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall was the only sound, a grim reminder of time slipping away, of the irreversible nature of what she had done. She could hear the distant wail of sirens approaching, growing louder with each passing moment. The police were coming. Neighbors had likely heard the gunshots and called in the emergency, but Madison didn't move. She remained seated, her back resting against the wall, the gun still clutched loosely in her hand. Her mind was eerily calm, almost detached from the horror surrounding her. She had imagined this moment countless times while plotting her revenge. She had envisioned a sense of satisfaction, a feeling of closure after avenging the betrayal that had torn her family apart. But as she sat there, staring at the bloodied scene, she felt none of those things. Instead, there was only emptiness, a hollow ache in the pit of her stomach that grew heavier with every passing second. The realization hit her slowly, like a cold wave creeping up her spine. Vengeance had cost her more than she had anticipated. Madison had spent so much time focused on the anger, the hurt, and the betrayal that she hadn't truly considered the aftermath. In killing Lexi, she had eliminated the girl who had once been her closest friend, but had ultimately become the embodiment of her father's betrayal. And in killing her father, she had rid herself of the man who had shattered her family's illusion of perfection. Yet in doing so, she had lost herself. The thought weighed heavily on her chest. She had believed that once she exacted her revenge, she would feel powerful in control again. But now that it was over, she realized that revenge had merely left her more broken than before. It hadn't brought back the trust she had lost, hadn't repaired the damage to her family. It had only left her standing in the wreckage alone. Madison's eyes drifted to her father's lifeless body. Daniel Hargrave, once a man of power and wealth, now lay crumpled on the floor. His eyes frozen in an expression of shock and fear. He had been a flawed man, guilty of selfishness and betrayal. But he had been her father, and despite the anger she had felt toward him, a small part of her grief for the man she had lost long before she pulled the trigger. Lexi's body, twisted and bloodied, lay just beyond. The betrayal from her best friend had cut the deepest. Lexi had played with Madison's trust, manipulated her feelings, and shattered their bond for a cheap affair with her father. But now, in death, Lexi was no longer the seductive villain Madison had envisioned. She was simply another victim of this twisted game, another life lost to the destructive power of betrayal. As the sirens grew louder, Madison thought about her mother, Lila. She hadn't been home when it happened, blissfully unaware of the chaos that had unfolded. Madison had spared her from witnessing the fallout. But that would only be temporary. Soon enough, Lila would return home to find her family destroyed, her husband and daughter gone. The thought of her mother's heartbreak weighed heavily on Madison's conscience, more than she had anticipated. She had justified her actions by telling herself it was all for her mother. Revenge for the lies, the betrayal. But now she realized her mother would never recover from this. Madison had taken away Lila's world, left her with nothing but grief and trauma. The guilt gnawed at her, more painful than she had ever expected. The police arrived soon after. The harsh red and blue lights flashed through the windows, casting an ominous glow over the room. The sound of doors slamming and hurried footsteps filled the air. Madison made no move to resist when the officers burst into the house, guns drawn, shouting commands. She simply let them take the gun from her hand, their voices distant and muffled, as if she were underwater. As they placed her in handcuffs, Madison remained silent, her mind far away from the chaotic scene around her. She had prepared herself for this moment, knowing full well that her actions would lead to her arrest. But it didn't matter anymore. She had already lost everything. Her family, her freedom, her future. The trial that followed was swift and brutal. Madison was labeled as a cold-blooded killer, a young woman who had lost her mind in a fit of rage and jealousy. The media painted her as a villain, a monster who had taken the lives of her own father and best friend. The public's fascination with the case grew, feeding off the scandalous details of the affair and the shocking nature of the murders. In court, Madison remained stoic, detached from the spectacle around her. Her lawyers argued for her mental state, claiming she had acted out of extreme emotional distress, but it made no difference. The jury saw her as a dangerous young woman who had crossed the line, and they convicted her of both murders. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Years passed, and Madison faded from the headlines. The Hargrave estate was sold, its dark history forgotten by most. Madison, now a prisoner in a maximum security facility, spent her days in quiet reflection. The weight of her choices bore down on her, heavier than any prison sentence. Her mother, Lila, had visited her once after the trial, the encounter brief and painful. The grief in Lila's eyes was unbearable, and Madison could hardly look at her. Lila had lost both her husband and daughter in a single, horrific moment. The woman who had once been vibrant and full of life was now a shadow of her former self. After that visit, Lila never returned. Madison understood why. In the stillness of her cell, Madison often thought about what could have been. She wondered if things might have turned out differently, if she had chosen another path, if she had confronted her father without resorting to violence, if she had sought justice through other means. But the weight of what if was a burden too heavy to bear. The cost of revenge had been far greater than she had anticipated. It had consumed her, destroyed her, and left her with nothing but the empty echoes of her past. In her pursuit of vengeance, she had become the very thing she despised, a monster shaped by betrayal, driven by rage. And now, in the cold, sterile walls of her prison, Madison lived out the remainder of her days, haunted by the choices she had made. The silence of her cell was a constant reminder of the lives she had taken, the lives she had destroyed. Revenge had ended badly for everyone, but it had ended worst of all for her. There was no redemption left to find, only the endless hollow hours of regret. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and like this video for more true crime video. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and theories in the comments section below. Take care and see you in the next video.